The whole fight over Claude Code and OpenCode looked like a pricing argument on the surface. It wasn't. What actually happened over the last few months is the AI coding world quietly drew a hard line between who owns the model and who owns the tool you type into, and that line is going to shape how a lot of developers work for the rest of this year. So let me walk through how we got here, because the story is more interesting than most people give it credit for, and a lot has changed even in the past 2 weeks. Back when AI coding started getting real, the first thing most people touched was GitHub Copilot. It ran on an early OpenAI model trained heavily on code, and at the time, it felt like magic. You'd start typing a function, and it would finish your thought. But if you look back honestly, Copilot was glorified autocomplete. It saved you some keystrokes, but you were still the one reading the documentation, making the architecture decisions, and stitching everything together. The AI sat in the very last step of your work and tried to guess what you wanted from whatever you'd already written. Helpful, sure, but your actual workflow didn't change. You were still doing the job the same way you always had. Then the form factor started shifting. Cursor and Windsurf showed up and forked the whole code editor so the AI could sit deeper inside it. And for the first time, you could write a plain English description of what you wanted and let the editor go do the work across multiple files. That was a real jump, because now you were working one level higher. You were describing intent instead of typing every line. Tools like Cline and the project that became Kilo Code lived as extensions inside your editor and worked in a back-and-forth rhythm where you'd approve a plan, watch it act, then approve the next step. That approval loop is still one of the cleaner ways to keep an agent honest, and it's a big reason Cline kept a loyal following. But the real change came when AI moved into the terminal. Aider was one of the first to really nail this. Instead of forking your editor or living as an extension, it ran in its own space, off to the side, and let the AI work without taking over your environment. Aider was sharp. It was great at clean diffs, careful about tokens, good at context. A lot of serious developers loved it. But to me, it always felt like a task tool. You gave it a job, it did the job, and that was the boundary. It didn't really change how you thought about the work. Claude Code is the same shape as Aider, terminal first, but it landed differently, and here's the part worth slowing down on. It wasn't just that the product worked well, though it did. It's that it pulled people into thinking about their entire project instead of one file or one function. You started writing things like claude.md and skill.md files, which are basically documents that take all the knowledge living inside a developer's head and put it on paper. And that one habit is quietly enormous. Because the thing holding back AI adoption was never really the models. It was that companies run on tribal knowledge, stuff nobody wrote down, that only exists in 3 people's heads. When a tool forces you to write that down so the AI can use it, you've just fixed the actual bottleneck. Developers started acting like project managers, and the work itself started reshaping around how the AI operates rather than the other way around. Now the money part, which is where the fight started. Claude Code lets you use your Anthropic subscription, so you could run a strong model without watching an API meter tick up on every single request. Anthropic basically eats some of that cost to keep people inside their world. The problem was that open source tools like OpenCode figured out they could log in the same way Claude Code did and pipe that same subsidized pricing into their own product. So you had people paying $20 or $200 a month and pulling hundreds, sometimes over $1,000 worth of tokens through outside agents. That math doesn't work for anyone running the servers. So Anthropic moved. In January, they quietly blocked those outside logins with no warning, got hit with backlash, and walked it back. In February, they rewrote the terms of service to spell it out. In March, they sent legal requests to OpenCode, which then stripped all the Claude subscription support out of its code. And on April 4th, they pulled the plug for real, starting with the most popular outside agent and saying the rest would follow. They handed out a one-time credit to soften it, but the timing looked rough because the creator of that agent had just left to join OpenAI a few weeks earlier, and OpenAI had been welcoming these displaced users with open arms the whole time. Here's the update most people missed, though, because the reference point I started from was a few weeks stale. Anthropic didn't leave it as a flat ban. In May, they brought third-party access back, but with a leash. Now you get a fixed monthly credit, somewhere between $20 and $200 depending on your plan, that you can spend on outside agents at regular API rates. Use it up, and you can't dip into your normal subscription pool, you buy more. Don't use it, and it expires. So the era where a cheap subscription quietly powered an always-on army of agents is just over. They turned it into metered billing wearing a subscription costume, and a lot of users read that as their plan getting quietly worth less. While all this was happening, the model side exploded, and this is the part that makes the lock-in fight look almost small. Opus 4.8 is still sitting at the top for the hard reasoning work, the big refactors, the stuff where you need the model to notice its own mistakes. But OpenAI's GPT 5.5 inside Codex now actually beats it on terminal benchmarks and runs cheaper per token, which is why a real number of developers run both, Claude Code for the thinking and Codex for the grinding. There's even a plugin now where you call Codex from inside Claude Code to have one model review the other's work. And then there's the open weight wave, mostly out of China, and it's not a joke anymore. GLM 5.2 from z.ai launched in mid-June with a 1 million token context window and a coding plan that undercuts everyone, plus it drops straight into Claude Code with a base URL swap because it speaks the same API shape. Kimi K2.7 from Moonshot and MiniMax M3 are both open-weight, both genuinely strong at agentic coding, both downloadable. GLM jumped something like 40 points between versions on one independent benchmark, which is the biggest single-generation leap that Tester had ever recorded. None of these touch Opus on the absolute hardest tasks yet. But they're close enough that smart teams now route work by job, sending the cheap volume coding to GLM and saving Opus for the high-stakes stuff and the final review. That routing idea is really the whole story underneath the drama. The harness, the thing you type into, is becoming a thin layer, and almost every tool, Claude Code, OpenCode, Cline, Kilo, Codex, is converging on the same loop of read, edit, run, repeat. They talk to each other now through shared standards. So the value and the cost are sliding down into the model layer, and developers are stuck choosing between loyalty to a better model and loyalty to a better tool, when increasingly they want to mix and match both. One small marker of how fast this moves, Code, a popular agent, got archived in May, and Kilo is basically its continuation. Tools come and go in weeks now, so the OpenCode fight was never really about one company gatekeeping a login. It was a stress test for the whole landscape, the first clear moment where the people who own the models and the people who own the tools realized their interests don't line up. And right now, most of us, myself included, are just running 2 or 3 tools at once, depending on the task and the budget. But the pressure is on. Open-weight models are putting a ceiling on what anyone can charge for a subscription. The harnesses are all blurring into each other, and 2026 is shaping up to be the year a crowded field gets cut down to a few names that actually matter. The only real question left is whether you'd rather bet on the best model or the best tool, because for a while longer you might not get to have both.